Hello, and welcome to the 10th episode of my podcast. Today I'm here alone, uh, and I decided to do this alone because, uh, partially because of technical difficulties, but I tried to get this to work while connected to Discord, and I didn't like it, so either way, I did plan on making this thing more serious because of the situation going on, and all you really need to know is basically that usually on this podcast I like to discuss gaming things and pop culture news and current, or to a much lesser extent, current events, but that's not what I'm gonna do right now. Because right now there's there's a much higher priority, and there are protests going up all over the globe, and I am 100% with them, and I think I am going to use this opportunity to explain why. So, I guess I'm not sure where to start exactly, but I think from personal experience, which is the least reliable but often the most emotionally resonant with people, uh, that's probably uh, that's probably a decent way to start. Is that I've never had a good experience with the police, I suppose you could say. I've always been witness or victim to their abuse of power. And if you don't know, which many people for some reason think I'm black or something, and I'm not, I am Caucasian, so there's that. But, yeah, I'm Caucasian, and my family and other people I know have been victims of abuses of authority from the authorities. And over time, I, of course, have learned that I'm not alone and people have it worse, much worse, in fact, than I or any people I may immediately know have it. And, of course, I think there is a large overlap between many different ideas, I suppose you could say. For example, uh, mostly the farther right conservatives are the ones who are against these protests, despite them only. These are the only protests that have had any results at all. And for example, our president has. I don't think I've ever seen a single tweet or statement from him where he said that some protesters who were violent were unjustified until now, until recently. Among other reasons, I have no reason to trust the system, and I don't think anyone else does. It runs much deeper than police, and I hope people know that. Our presidents ever since 9/11 have just made security, made policing, made monitoring people worse and worse. And even President Barack Obama, who I think is going down in history like a Martin Luther King or Gandhi or Malcolm X like figure when he doesn't even compare to any of them. Even he has had he did what Trump sort of did by sending the National Guard, or using lethal force to stop protests like this. That's not okay, and it never was. No government will ever, of course, allow its own downfall to happen. I don't think that's what anyone wants. I've never seen anyone say that. But our founding fathers believe that it is our right to revolt in cases like these, when the social contract and our consent to be governed has been revoked because the government has not kept their side of the deal fair. I don't think there's any way you can analyze this and not side with the protesters at all. I know many people have been conditioned by the law to just be afraid of anything that's outside it, even if the people who are, I guess, seemingly, debatably outside it are seemingly justified. But the point is that we've had these protests go on for decades, I suppose centuries, if you want to associate all of civil rights and all of emancipation with this movement, which is not unjustified. And peaceful protest has not worked. Gandhi, for example, he was peace only, and it got him pretty far. But I think most of the Indian people, for example, they understand that where he fell short was that peace was not, well, I guess it wasn't always appropriate. And I'm not saying that, I don't know. I'm not going to try and say anything too ridiculous, but just as a very, very specific isolated example, you're not going to be able to preach your way out of a knife or a gunfight. I think most philosophers agree that in specific contexts, hate can overpower love because hate has a gun. So I don't understand why people would want a voice of reason who can very easily be killed to never ever consider defending themselves, ever. I suppose it might seem a bit juvenile of me to, I suppose I think listening to music has really changed my mind on a lot of things and has allowed me to learn, like Rage Against the Machine, and that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say I might seem juvenile, if that's what changed me. But, well, it's not the only factor. In fact, well before that, I always thought this way, I suppose. I think that's how I sort of started this off anyway, but music was able to put it all into context for me. And once I learned that, then I I don't know. I suppose learning that the the U.S. right wing is pretty much exclusively in favor of this high policing. In, they don't believe police brutality or bigotry even exists. Some of them. And then I learned that the right wing is basically trying to be, united under evangelical ideas. I always somewhat noticed it, but it was always a bit uncanny that, like, for example, someone might try to be pro-life, but they don't use any religious beliefs to do it, and it makes it seem like they have their own totally arbitrary secular philosophy going on. But I think the truth of that is that a lot of right-wing ideas are strictly religious, and some people who are right-wing and not religious are like, I don't know, from a different faith have sort of been fooled. They've been fooled into believing nonsense. So they defend terrible beliefs, and they defend police brutality. They're not affected. They have privilege. It's even worse when it's like an LGBT person or a person of color who believes that bigotry doesn't exist because they're not personally affected and have never been affected. But it happens. It's somewhat common. And I think part of that might have been why I slowly but surely, and I suppose this is sort of off topic, and I want these two things to intertwine. I sort of believe that I'm much more secular now, I suppose, is what I'll say. I can't believe in a god anymore. This isn't really from personal experience. It's from, seriously thinking, using reason, listening to contrary opinions, listening to people I used to respect, and seeing how things overlap. Essentially, what I believe is that there's a sort of denial of reality with religious ideas and right-wing ideas. And I think the protests we have now are just the start of what we need. This is not even scratching the surface. People who are denying facts and denying reality in many ways are often the ones who want to conserve some version of our country or some version of reality that was never all that great or never even existed. They have an idealized version of reality. And I think that manifests itself in many forms. And I think that's what people need to learn. I've talked with a lot of my friends, including Avion, who is usually the other voice you hear on this podcast, and some of our former guests and other people that have never been on this podcast, and maybe they never listened to it either, but, well, yeah. But yeah, I've talked to them about it, and I've considered whether I should be more vocal in activism or not. Like be my own advocate for my own beliefs. I don't know. On Twitter, I'm always that way, sort of, but when I make a project like a podcast, for example, I don't really do that. In fact, I explicitly sort of banned that from my podcast. I banned politics. I banned other stuff. I kind of wanted to keep mentions of the pandemic to a minimum, but I think that's just a recommendation. I just want to, I suppose, give people something to listen to for as long as they can, and then hopefully they can slowly find their way back to me, back to these beliefs they'll understand, maybe. I've lived in a red state for a few years, and it was probably the lowest point of my life where I was just surrounded by hatred and bigotry, and people genuinely believed that whatever happened in their small town was an accurate representation of the rest of the world, and that's why they subscribed to stupid shit like all lives matter, and they were pro-life, and other standard right-wing beliefs that evangelicals love. But even back then, I was just starting to lose hope because everything seemed so bad, and that's what the media often was. That's what the right-wing media often is. It's, you have to mobilize your group and then get upset and go off, I guess. I don't know. For them, it's just constant hysteria, constant reaction. While even when they do take action, the news never gets better. It just never does. They sort of cling to a parody version of scripture. That's why Fox News, for example, they've always had religious voices as their main figureheads, like Bill O'Reilly, who is a liar and a predator as well. It always happens with these people. For example, Bill O'Reilly had a bit of a debate with Bill Maher about the Bible, and as always, Bill O'Reilly likes to claim that his recordings of his discussions are unedited, and they're not. Not this one, not the one he had with Maher. O'Reilly is a liar, and I think it's ironic that whenever theology and religion comes into politics, there's just always, the religious people are always lying. They're always trying to use religion as a shield in some way, whether it be like, that boy can't be a rapist, he's a good Christian boy who goes to a good Catholic school, as if Catholic schools are actually morally upright and not like the worst in terms of bullying and teen pregnancy and partying and drugs. Or, that police officer was a good Christian and a good man, I totally trust him, even though that does not mean he wouldn't fucking kill a man or something. And, well, in the case of like O'Reilly versus Maher, as I was trying to bring up, by claiming his recording was unedited while leaving out part of Mars' context to make him look bad. Well, he's breaking a commandment. He's lying. So I find that pretty ironic, is that the religious right is filled with liars, and how they're, for example, in climate change, there's a famous statement by a Republican senator that they are just trying to stall the conversation. That's their tactic on climate change. They don't care about the facts. They're just trying to lie. They're covering everything up as best they can. And religion is one of the means in which they do it. And, like, there basically is there are no Christians like what I used to be that matched up with my beliefs. None that were leaders anyway, none that actually had money and power. It was always the corrupt, Bible-thumping literalists. So, that's... I had to sort of look inward. I think this actually happened while I was trying to listen to a podcast once upon a time, and I was playing a game in the meantime, and then I was recommended some videos from some atheist activists, and I decided to hear them out, particularly R and Ra. I think this happened on March 20th or March 19th. I started watching on March 19th, but I think the 20th is when I actually changed, because I kept watching him and kept listening and realized that I've been fed the same nonsense throughout my life, and that all of it is concordant with a conservative view of reality, and all of it is wrong. A lot of what I've been told in school is just misrepresentations and lies, and a lot of who controls our institutions are conservatives who believe that lying and censorship are okay, that McCarthyism was actually good. But that's what we have to look out for. We need more movements than just Black Lives Matter. This is a start, but we're not even close to, we're not even close to having true civil rights for everyone, especially not those being affected right now by police brutality. There's a clear power imbalance there, and it's only the beginning. So, I suppose I wanted to sort of have this be just informative and wrap it up, and I don't know if I'll keep talking for minutes and minutes and minutes or wrap up soon, but I'll see what I can come up with, and, well, you can tell by when this stops, I suppose. This is the 10th episode of our podcast anyway, so I think it's sort of special in that it's like a personal look and just a discussion. And as I said at the beginning, it's not like this podcast would have been very eventful anyway if it was just normal, because there's basically no gaming or pop culture news going on at the moment. There's just Xenoblade is out, I guess. Cool. Shantae is out. Cool. But right now, we have protests everywhere, all over the US and multiple states, and Japan, and tensions are rising in other countries. So I'm I'm actually kind of optimistic. If this podcast might have deceived you with how I sound right now, but uh, while these protests were happening, I was feeling good. I loved that they were happening because something actually happened, and I think that's great. And at the same time, through social media, for example, people have also been realizing who's been trying to deceive them. They've seen who's fake and who's real, who will actually stand with them. I think all I want to say to people who are protesting or are concerned about the protesting is that you're doing great. Keep going. This is probably the most amount of progress we've had in years. It's going really well, I think. It's not a loss like Charlottesville or something. And Charlottesville, for example, it was a disaster, but in the end, no one really won that one either. I don't know if I'll link it or something, but there was some undercover studies and a documentary I watched last year when it was recent about the thoughts uh, of the white supremacist community, yeah, of all things, and what was going through their mind during the Unite the Right rally. And as it turns out, most in the community realized that public demonstrations like that do not work. So, like, that's why we have only seen, like, police opposition and some undercover, like, white dudes, some shady figures during these protests who are not with the protesters at all. They can't do much to stop you. All they can do is spread information and lies, and they can't fight you because I hope they're slowly going to realize that their ideology is nonsense and that they have no leverage in the world except through terror. And I suppose that's the thing, is that the KKK, for example, and other hate groups are overwhelmingly right-wing and overwhelmingly religious, and at that point you just have to wonder why. And that's what I've had to do. I've always believed in just the most arbitrary things about religion, I think. Like I stopped believing like anything in the Bible because I was shown the science and whatever, and I was told that it's still possible to sort of believe in scripture while also believing the science, and so that's what I did. So I've always believed in an old universe. I've always believed in like the Big Bang and evolution and stuff like that, but I think I, like other believers, believed that God was somewhere in there. Like he caused the Big Bang or something, and he created life and then got this all started exactly as the science textbooks say it did. Now, in my view, I think that's a pretty arbitrary thing to believe. I don't know how I convinced myself of that, and I honestly do not know how anyone else convinces themselves of that either. I can't really, be too upset if people do, but I don't think it really helps them to believe that, and in some cases might be detrimental even if otherwise their beliefs are rational and justified, because there's just no evident basis in reality for any of it. Of course, there were always other problems with my faith that I never got answers to, like what's up with other versions of the Bible? What was the original text? Do we have that original text? How accurate is our translation? And, well, why there are even other versions of Christianity. Why are Jews still Jews? Why are Muslims still Muslims? Why are there other religions if we're so true? I think I was in a weird spot of being both I have some fundamentalists in my family and know some fundamentalists, but at the same time I know a lot of secular people and had a relatively unbiased secular education. Not entirely, but it was mostly fair. And I've since realized what parts of that were clearly influenced by conservative groups that do control what goes in our textbooks. And I've since learned how stupid their revisions are. They do want to remove context out of our books and just either feed us gray sludge or outright lies, or only the white Christian perspective. Sometimes even just this white Christian male perspective. But that's how it is. So what I'm trying to do is find like-minded people. Or maybe, hopefully I can talk to people and reason with them and maybe even convince them. I don't know. But yeah, that's what I do. It's probably what I will be doing for a while. It's a part of, it's a part of life, because these are the issues that surround all of our lives, and they will affect us. In some cases, they already have. I hope I've at least so far shown that there's a bit of a spider web going on, how some of these issues come from the same ideologies or philosophies or whatever. Some of them come from the same sort of flawed beliefs. But that's what fractal wrongness is. If the basis of your belief is wrong, then everything else you believe is wrong. Or at least many other things are incorrect at the very least, but that's what fractal wrongness is. As a sort of similar thing, I have my own sort of, I guess, word, phrase, term that's similar to fractal wrongness, and I use it to describe people who believe things that are mostly right but for the wrong reasons. And I call that slant correctness. Basically, imagine a perfectly straight line, and your task is to trace over that straight line. So you get a stencil or something, and you trace over it with a big Sharpie, Of course, you go off course a little bit because Sharpies are kind of fat and stencils are not perfect. But if you got like a computer to analyze how well you covered the line and how efficient you were, then maybe you were on a slant, for example, then you would be mostly right. You'd be like 99%, 98%, maybe worse. And that's what I call slant correctness. You are mostly on course, but you did the right things, but for the wrong reasons. And I think my example would be plague doctors, for example. That's an example of slant correctness, where they have these giant, basically what are hazmat suits that cover them. Of course, they did not believe they were like hazmat suits because those didn't exist yet, and they didn't know about what we know today about chemistry and biology and microbiology. And they basically had the functional equivalent to gas masks with those little bird masks with perfumes in the nose that was supposed to protect them, but they had their very superstitious version of chemistry and biology and medicine. So some of the things they did, like the design of their suit, was correct, but for the wrong reasons. So that's what I'd say is an example of slant correctness. And because, you know, they did the wrong things sometimes because of the basis of their beliefs, then that's where the slant comes in, because they also did some wrong things. But yeah, I guess this has been sort of a brief look into what I believe, and I realize it's not entirely coherent, because it's these are just statements, I guess. And for some people it takes an entire book or an entire biography to explain something like this and how this is all connected, why they believe what they do. And this has only been like less than 40 minutes of unedited footage. So, yeah. I'm kind of tired. My throat is getting dry, and I think I'm running out of things to say. So, with that being said, I'm gonna wrap this up. So, yeah. I think I'll just have a short description and some stuff that I advertised last week in the description. And next podcast is probably going to be much different. Hopefully I do not have technical difficulties or anything of the sort. Hopefully I can actually effectively communicate. I don't know if there will be a guest next time. I think we have some people lined up. I did not have a guest planned for this week anyway, so that's why I decided I'll just go at this alone. And yeah, so that's why we're here. I think before I go, I do have some thoughts, I guess. I think I will try to get into making non-podcast videos soon, sometime soon. The video I'll make, some of the videos I'll make, I know will probably be way more popular than this podcast will ever be, but yeah, I think that's that. With that being said, goodbye. Probably be back to the same old thing next week. Hopefully some interesting stuff happens. Hopefully I won't have to be a bearer of bad news or anything. Hopefully things get better. I don't know. Well, this has been 40 minutes, so that's about it. So goodbye. I don't think I'll have an outro for this one.